Hi, everyone. I'm Lizzie Lack, and thank you for joining us today for this installment of Technically Creative. If you're joining us for the first time, Technically Creative is where we interview alumni who have found themselves pursuing artistic and creative industries. And so today I'm so excited we have on Matt Moulthrop. He is a 2004 MBA graduate of the Scheller College of Business. And Matt, how are you? Thank you for joining us.
Good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So first off, we talked a little bit about um, me as someone who's not that familiar with wood turning, and for the people who have just tuned in and also aren't, can you give us kind of a crash course in what wood turning is?
What wood turning is the act of turning objects into a round form or cylindrical, and there's wood turning, and then modern time would be more machining with turning metal, but it was a utility of turning things that had functionality. So the simplest would be a baseball bat, banister railing.
Okay.
And my grandfather just had this vision, of using wood turning as an art form, because all art forms were born out of utility. Painting, being the oldest, was a form of communication, and that's, for instance, they painted on cave walls, "Don't poke the bison." Well, wood turning was no different in terms of it served a functionality purpose that grew into an art form.
hmm
And
And
I was going to say my
go
grandfather's
ahead.
credited as kind of pioneering this. So it was, but anyways, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to talk about your grandfather. He is oftentimes called the father of modern wood turning, and your father was also into wood turning. Did you always know at a young age that you would naturally go into this?
I did not. No, not even in the least. I was, uh, I guess, as a child. I mean, there were five grandchildren. They're all in and around mainly my grandfather's studio, and it had to do with the timing and his age. And he
Mhm.
taught all of us, the basics, the simplicities, the language of the tools, and that was it. But as far as pursuing as a career, that didn't come until my early 20s, but the desire to do it may have been in my late teens.
So I think I read somewhere, did you pick up or start working on a lathe at it was like age 7 or something? Like you were young when you learned how to do wood turning?
I was a tall child, so that helped. But but it was for fun. You're with your grandfather. You don't know what he does, and you think it's kind of interesting, and it's very engaging and tactile. And so you see this, and that's when I guess started learning very simple things, the operation, but more formally in high school, I worked for him, and what would be defined more as an apprenticeship. But I would make pieces, and I'd just give them away to teachers and friends and family.
You didn't charge for those pieces?
Not, not in the beginning, no.
Right, you're like, oh, it took a little bit of time. Well, that's so fun. I feel like I remember my grandfather did a lot of not wood turning, but he had a workshop, and I remember I would peer over his shoulder and watch him work, and he would teach me. So I mean, I feel like the knowledge that you get passed down is, second to none. So I can imagine that was, the best apprenticeship you could possibly have
It was very
with
special.
yeah. Okay, can you walk us through what a typical workday looks like for you? And I know you are in your workspace right now, and I don't know how easy it is for you to get up, but I'm sure we'd all love to kind of see what you're working on if that's possible.
That's
Oh,
some of the stuff
oh,
I'm
that's
working on
awesome.
now.
Okay.
Um, Actually, everything is commissions
Okay.
that for mostly families, trees that had special significance to them. The over here.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Beautiful.
Thank you. But typical work day, I do maintain very regular schedule. Takes a year from start to finish roughly to create a piece. Some take longer. There's a science behind why. It's got to do with the properties of wood. But yeah, it can be pretty rigorous, and I don't, and sometimes it's not a typical day or week. I mean, I'll work through the weekends or nights, and especially if I have to, because studio time's different than talking to people, and so a lot of times I have to be available when they are, and that can be with different time zones. That can be a bit challenging, especially around having a family.
Yeah, definitely. And your workspace is in your house, is that correct?
It is. I do work from home. It's can be solitary work, but it fits my personality.
Yeah. And especially right now with, COVID going on, it's probably nice that you didn't have to go remote. You were already at home, so
Yeah.
it was
I was practicing quarantining.
You were already ready. Yes.
I was prepared.
So I did want to talk a little bit about your MBA and getting it at Georgia Tech. I read that you said you knew before you completed your MBA that you felt it was necessary for you to complete it, but you also knew that you wanted to be an artist full time. So can you talk a little bit about why it was important for you to do that?
Well, as a family tradition, we always valued education. I think it's a critical function in the success of life, and that was instilled in me at a young age. And my father has a law degree, and I wouldn't use him as a lawyer though. But
I hope he's not listening right now. So,
but he is a good artist. Anyways, but the MBA came into play. My grandfather, he loved Georgia Tech. I think he loved it more than his own alma maters because he's not a Tech graduate. He went to Case Western and Princeton, and he has fond memories, but Tech really was, in a lot of ways, what developed his success for his life and path. And he wanted to maintain a connection, and the timing for this was, like the Woodturning, was also right. I was coming out of school, and the master's program, at the time it was not accredited MBA, it was the master's management, but or science of management. Anyways, but I applied and went through the program, and like anything Tech offers, it was challenging and get through those, and but it helps in your career too, because anything worthwhile is not going to be easy.
Very true. Yeah. And I not remember, when I was reading about your father and your grandfather, that was definitely a theme with your grandfather's architecture degree and teaching at Georgia Tech, your father pursuing law. So I noticed that education was an important component, and it had to be, of your lives, and that was probably instilled in you, like you said. So can you talk a little bit about your grandfather's time at Georgia Tech and kind of how we talked earlier about, he kind of had his hand everywhere at the time in sketching buildings and so on.
So when he finished at Princeton, it was his graduate degree. It was during the Great Depression. There were no jobs, and so there was an opportunity that was brand new. It was a grant. The United States Army needed more people educated in math and physics. And so he took a role as a professor at Georgia Tech teaching calculus and physics. And this would have been somewhere around 1940, 41. And he moved to Atlanta. He thought he'd only be here a few years. And he wanted to be an architect. That's what his passion was at the time. He thought I would be in New York. That's where all the you make your name as an architect. And so when moving to Atlanta, he ended up, my grandmother, who he was, had started dating, was also from his original hometown, Ohio, which where Case Western is. They ended up getting married, and they lived in professor housing, which is now where the Interstate 7585 is. And he was with Tech about 5 years, and he designed Van Leer Electrical, the rendering to, I guess, the renovation, one of of Bobby Dodd Stadium. There are several other buildings, and Tech's been very proactive now about tracing archives, because I didn't know about Van Leer. I found out about that a couple years ago, but he was, pardon?
Oh, I just said, oh wow, because I didn't, that you had just found out about that a few years ago.
I did a commission, yes. When they remodeled Van Leer, and they left this atrium as, that he had designed, in part of the renovation, they encompassed it. Well, they had to take out some trees, and I ended up doing a big piece that's in the lobby there. So, but he was hired away by a Georgia Tech family, the Roberts family, Robert and Company, and the Chip Roberts buildings on North Avenue at Tech. And he was their, I guess, lead architect, worked his way up to chief designer. And he left their firm in the late 60s to pursue the career as an artist. Always loved architecture and remained close to Tech and their architecture department. And presidents would invite him to football games, and he was known amongst their crowd and often attributed as being an alumni, and he wasn't. He was a professor, but I think the growth of Atlanta and the growth of businesses down here, that really propelled his career, not only as an architect, but as an artist. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of funny. This was probably 20, maybe 30 years ago. He was doing a talk with John Portman, who's a known Tech alum. Mm-hmm. And no one in the crowd knew that my grandfather was an architect. And John Portman was laughing. And he's like, I remember, because they had a relationship prior to him becoming an artist. And he always knew my grandfather was an architect, so.
So, yeah, Tech runs deep in your veins then. So I do have one question for you. How did you find yourself at UGA undergrad? I'm just kidding. We won't pull your tail too much about going to UGA. Actually, I don't even know if I can say UGA on this live stream.
Well, it's they say house divided, but maybe it's a person divided. So it's. Yeah. But I've done a lot more projects for Georgia Tech. So.
Okay, well, good. We have that then. That's awesome. Shifting gears to speaking about projects. Do you always know what the end result, what the end design is going to be, or do you kind of just figure it out as you're doing it?
No, that's a great question, and you do know. You have to read the log. You have to study what's going on, because ultimately the piece is only going to be as good as what nature provides. So in our work, it's a revelation process. We're uncovering what nature has given, and so a piece will only be as good as the material you start with. And it's critical that you read the material and execute the best piece possible. And there are times that it can be messed up. But that was one of the early things I did learn more on the, I guess, more formal training and learning. And you do have to study that a great deal, because you have to be able to kind of envision or see what the sculpture is. And I always steal from Da Vinci on that one, because he was the legend, but it's true. I mean, that's how, because you're taking away, not adding, and I can't go back once I start because I've removed material.
Did you feel like in a way you're like a sculptor in that sense, that you can't really add on? Like, yeah, you take away essentially. It
is, and so where that can be the most crucial is if you have a very limited amount of material and you only have one shot. And it's not, for instance, where I'm given an entire tree where I can survey which would be the most desirable sections, and there's a second and third. Well, sometimes I'm only given a singular piece of wood. A good example of that would be a building. I was recently given a piece of wood from the White House that was from the Truman administration, and he was the only president to have moved out of the White House for that renovation, and all the pieces of wood were given to the U.S. senators and congressmen at the time. And anyways, that one can't be replaced, and so you do have to think, what is the best approach, but you enjoy the challenge, and it's part of the work.
This might be a silly question as we're talking about wood, and are there types of wood that you cannot work with? And is there types of wood that you're like, oh yes, I work with this piece? I'm thinking of my limited knowledge, like an oak tree or something. Is that a good type of wood, or doesn't quite matter?
Honestly, it really doesn't matter. But there's woods that are less desirable than others. So, like for instance, dogwood. I only use dogwood if it's a commission. It's the hardest indigenous wood in North America. And some people who have some wood knowledge might argue that, but it's the only tree that's truly indigenous. There are harder species that have spread, but it's just a real punishment in terms of how dense it is, and it's prone to failing, meaning it'll crack and split on you. But and they rate wood internationally with what's called a Jinka rating, and there's different scales for it. But but woods from the southern hemisphere, central, we'll say Central and South America, their woods are much more difficult to work with. But as a general rule, just in terms of people learning or wanting knowledge about wood, there's a reason why certain species of trees were incorporated into construction. It's basically the same as domesticated animals. For instance, cherries used in flooring and cabinetry, and so are oaks and maples. Well, you don't use plum, peach, pear, apple, and they're all in the prunus family. Well, we'll make bowls out of those, and they make beautiful sculptures. And that's part of, what's fun. And the woods are more difficult to work with than a cherry. But there's a reason why these certain species of woods were used for those purposes. But I did a project about 2 years ago for the Panamanian government. My father and I did a series out of logs removed from the Panama Canal, and it was completely foreign to us, unbelievably dense woods, but it made a beautiful series.
Oh, that sounds amazing, and I had no idea. I thought it was going to be kind of a simple, one answer to my question, but seems like there's a whole world out there that, to know about trees and types of wood to use. I'm learning something new right now, so thank you.
Useless knowledge, as I tell my children.
It's not useless for you. You need to know all this stuff, so that's awesome. So I guess this kind of leads into my next question is, where do you find your inspiration then? Where is it easiest to find inspiration?
Honestly, it's from the material itself. That's the source of it. You like the challenge. Some woods that once you develop a certain, approach to it, there's a simplicity in replicating it. And the best way I could describe that in a layman's term would be, if you've written the song, it's reperforming it.
Okay.
And performing it to that level of passion that has the energy behind it.
Well, then what would you say, or if you've already done it, what is your dream project to work on then?
That's a great question. I always, it's, that's a hard one to singularly answer into one, but
Right.
there's certainly, as a generality, I like projects that have meanings beyond what I'm doing. So the tree would have significance, whether it's from, we'll even say a Georgia Tech campus or a building, or a family. But there's, trees, they live long, most cases live longer than us, and it provides a sense of history and lineage. It's like someone once said, like the roots of a family, the trees' roots run deep as well. And so I do like those projects because they're not always the most interesting subject in terms of would I pick that piece of wood, but the challenge is creating something that's a beautiful sculpture from turning the ordinary mundane into hopefully something extraordinary.
Right. And so I'm going to jump a little bit to what has been submitted on Facebook because this is kind of in par with this. I think this is Howard Wertheimer, if he's still viewing. Hi, Howard. He says, thanks for the great piece you did for the Van Leer building at Georgia Tech. And do you have favorite woods that you like working with?
It would go back to, in terms of just absolute favorite, I like woods that have that second meaning, but in terms of identifying a singular tree, the woods that are commercially used, like
right.
the oaks and maples, there is a pattern of simplicity to them, and it can make things less challenging and or less difficult. And I do like when things go well, because wood is a living material. It's cellulose. And so you think of floors and doors that would swell during humid months and contract during winter. Well, the bowl as a sculpture is no different. It's going to breathe and have movement. Well, some of those woods typically will have less, and that's in more predictable movements. And that's, but the ones that don't fail on me, I typically like the best.
Yeah. Have you ever started on a project and it's not going where you think it is, you're struggling, and then it turns out better than you thought, or quite the opposite? Has there been times that, or you know exactly where you're going when you start?
Typically, from log to completion, if the piece is going to fail, it can fail in the drying process, and that can be disheartening. And that goes back to the properties of wood. So wood on the eastern United States is full of water. When the water leaves, the cells shrink. That's where you get cracking. That's where you split firewood. Well, and I've had pieces fail that you invest a great deal of time into. The only time that I would be more surprised is when I'm introduced to a species I've never worked with before, and that would be more. And it is challenging, and it does happen. I've not worked with every species that's out there, and so having that challenge of what to expect, but it being wood, they do come from this similar phylus or genomes, and you can see, okay, the woods, the tannins will darken or lighten. This is the moisture, and so, and especially with technology, you can read about if anyone else has done this.
Okay. How many species, do you know off the top of your head how many species of wood there are out there? Is it like thousands?
Yes, it would be easily.
Okay, so you have not hit your quota yet of all thousands of the woods to work with.
No, because people always want to say yellow pine. We're in Georgia and we have lots of pines, but there's probably 30 different species of pine that exist in the state of Georgia. Well, there is no such thing as yellow pine. Typically loblolly pines, what they're seeing, and that's Pinus taida, or slash pine. It's southern more South Georgia version. But yes, there's even within the pine species, I don't think I've conquered that as well.
I'm going to take a pre-submitted question that we had. This is from Dan, and he said, seeing your grandfather's work in the mid-'80s inspired me to take up wood turning. I still love it and enjoy how you and your dad have evolved. Do you still use mainly polyglycol to stabilize? And I think I said that right, what he was asking.
You did great. Polyethylene glycol 1000, PEG 1000. We do. We don't as much as he did, and it's got to do with sharing knowledge across 3 generations and a better understanding of the properties of wood into species people don't typically use. So what polyethylene glycol 1000 is, it's a water-soluble wax. It's inert. It's non-toxic. It's used in soft drinks and hand lotions and face creams. We just buy a non-sterilized version, industrial grade, and you melt it and add water to it. What it does is displaces water in eastern wood so they don't crack. And my grandfather came up with this method, and it wowed people from the wood world because they'd never seen an entire section of a tree not split. And it's like, for instance, I was talking about the Panama Project. Well, some woods the woods that are from the western United States and the southern hemispheres are very stable. They don't crack. You wouldn't put them in peg. They don't need it. So it's a theory, but they think that when the Ice Age occurred, it started on the northern hemisphere, wiped out vegetation. So through the Continental Divide, our forests regenerated. We have scientifically, we have these cousin trees to the southern hemisphere, but they're not as mature and they're not as stable. And stable means that they're useful, dense, predictable, those factors. And but the peg worked great with displacing the moisture content through gravity, and that's what he's asking. That's probably a longer, more technical answer, but
hopefully Dan's watching right now, so he could see what you're saying about that, or he can watch it later. But yeah, there's a lot more technical knowledge that goes into it than I thought. It's not just picking up a paintbrush and painting on canvas and there you go. It seems you need to know your stuff.
It's true. But so a lot of the stuff that are the people who do any type of woodworking, whether it's for fun, it's you learn quick. It's not that hard, I promise.
I have another question for you, and that is, I'm sure you've gotten lots of advice from your grandfather and father throughout the years, but if you could pull one piece from each of them, what did they pass down to you that you remember the most or stuck with you for the longest?
Let me think. Remember the most. I got lots of advice, obviously, and influence. When my grandfather, when I was working for me, simple advice, but one time he said, all jobs will be boring. And you have to accept that, but, it's not always going to be like that. And that's true. There's parts of my job that can be boring. And that stuck with me. And because you think, everyone gets to, you can do wherever you want, whenever you want. And that's not true. My dad probably just the work ethic, working through problems, challenges, that kind of thing, and maintaining that schedule, because there is a great deal of time in the studio, and that's what, it's that extra detail that you're willing to push forward through to get the desired result.
Mm-hmm. I like the part where you said all jobs are going to be boring. Even if you're doing your dream job, there's always going to be parts of it that aren't that fun, or the kind of the admin parts, or things can get slow. So I appreciate what he said. Oh, and I just got a note that Dan is watching. So hopefully he got his question answered. So hi Dan, thanks for joining us and thank you for your question. But I'm sad to say though that we're out of time right now. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. I learned a lot today about wood turning and a lot about wood and trees, and I will definitely be looking into all that and staring at my cabinets now in my house, I'm sure, and trying to figure out if they're maple or something good. So thank you so much. I so enjoyed talking to you. Our next speaker is going to be on Thursday, September 10th, and her name is Mckenna Carroll. She is a senior product manager for Adidas. She's been there for the past 5 years in Portland, Oregon, at their headquarters for the U.S., and she's going to be chatting with us about her career in the fashion and retail space. So thank you all again for joining us. If you have anyone who you want to be on and have us interview, please let us know. We know there's a lot of creative alumni out there who are pursuing artistic endeavors, and we'd love to have you on. So with that, stay safe, stay healthy, and go Jackets.